He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 27 years of experience. Together, he and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back for another episode, Henry. Today, I want us to talk about something referencing my blog post this week, which was titled "A Case for Delaying the Start of Your Ad Career." And the reason I wrote about this is because I gave a talk recently to a class of college students at the University of Minnesota, Mark Jensen's class. He's been a guest on our show in the past. And I mentioned while I was talking some advice that I thought might be relevant, which was, you don't have to jump right into an ad career right after you finish either your college program or finishing up an advertising portfolio type program. Take some time off. And I don't mean just going off to Europe and backpacking. I mean, do something to get yourself into the world of just living, experiencing life, watching other people live their lives, becoming observant, becoming a kind of amateur anthropologist. What surprised me was the number of students who wrote me the next day saying, I never thought about this. That's really great advice. So I wrote this essay from my blog on that very subject and talked about the fact that I didn't get started in the ad world until I was almost 30 years, a month shy of my 30th birthday. When I graduated from college, I started off my first career working in the front office of a sports franchise. Then I went off to graduate school and wrote poetry and literary translation. Then I went to Europe. And along the way, I also did some other kind of odd things, like I was a stonemason for a few months, laying stones for a pool company. Not exactly an endeavor that someone who is accustomed to sitting and writing would do, but it all became what I would call part of my seasoning. Now, I didn't go on to a kind of a career that won me a lot of awards, got me a lot of attention as a great creative mind, but I had a pretty good career for 26 years. So I thought this might be an interesting topic to discuss. Do you have any thoughts on it, Henry?
I agree. I don't think that it's necessarily specific to advertising. I think that in general, there's so much pressure on young people today to have their life charted out, for at a time in which you're incredibly immature, you're incredibly unknowledgeable about a lot of things. And the idea that you're going to make that kind of a commitment to something that you're supposedly going to spend the rest of your working life doing doesn't make a ton of sense to me. For me, advertising was a second, almost third career. I got out of school and I went to work in retail management, and I owned my own sports gift shop for a time. And then I went back to school because I was going to become a high school history teacher. And that was when I got hired at the ad agency. So, life threw a few curveballs at me that I had never anticipated going to work at an ad agency or working in advertising. And it did. But, I just think that, there's so much pressure on kids. I had a colleague just yesterday, I was talking to him and he was telling me about his daughter who is freaked out. She's 17. She's approaching her senior year and she doesn't know what she's going to do. She doesn't know what she's going to study, where she's going to go to college. And I looked at him and I said, tell her to go to community college and take a bunch of classes in different things and be exposed to different things and see what she likes. And then she could always finish up at a 4-year school after. And he's like, that's what I told her. I'm glad you said that. I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, why the big hurry to, especially, I come from a Hispanic household. We're not kicking our kids out of the house the day they turn 18, especially if they're doing something fruitful like going to school. So yeah, I don't, Gary Vaynerchuk, right? He's this guy who he became like this social media mogul. I believe the story was his father owned like a wine store. And so to help promote his father's wine store, he started putting up videos on YouTube about wine, and he became one of the early YouTube creators that was very successful. And now the guy's a brand in and of himself, and he's a guru, a marketing guru. And there's a lot of people that have, I think that we had Mark Ritson on talking about Gary Vaynerchuk. And Mark hates, he doesn't hate Gary Vaynerchuk. He hates the stuff he talks about marketing. But I think Gary Vaynerchuk, I kind of have two views of him. There's Gary Vaynerchuk, the marketing expert, which I agree with Mark Ritson. He's not a marketing expert. And then there's Gary Vaynerchuk, the motivational speaker. And I really like Gary Vaynerchuk, the most motivational speaker. And this is one of his tenets. Like, young kids come to him all the time and like, well, what should I do? He's like, go out and get experience in the real world.
Yeah.
Go do things.
Yeah.
Figure
Yeah.
out what you like. Figure out what you don't like. See the world. See how other people live the world. And you're going to find something. Don't put that pressure on yourself at such a young age.
Yeah, exactly.
We
I know
were,
one of the things that I was talking about in my essay was the fact that in order to do a really good job selling, which is what we do when we're in the advertising world, is you have to understand who you're talking to. You have to understand your audience, which requires a degree of empathy. If there's a big critique that I have of our practitioners today, is they're kind of elitists, and they just, they're almost looking down their noses on the people that they're trying to sell products to. They don't know what it's like to go to the store and buy Pop-Tarts or toothpaste. Maybe they use these products themselves, but they don't know who the people are who use them. And that's what I think is one of the things I've admired most about you. And I quoted you in this essay when I said that it took you a while because you're a late starter too, and you're self-taught in this business. And one of the things that you do when you write a brief that I've always admired is that when you're answering the question, who are we talking to? Who is our audience? You write the answer to that question in a way that creatives see it as a costume that we can put on and try to see the world through the eyes of the customer we're talking to. You can't do that if you haven't lived a life and have a degree of empathy for what it's like.
Yeah,
that's something you have to live your life a bit to figure that out.
This came up when we were talking with Paul Taylor of Adweek, WEAK,
right?
Who's a creative in his own right, a successful creative from big agencies, and he was he was reflecting on that. That 21-year-old doesn't know anything. They don't know shit from Shinola, and so if you're a strategist or a creative, the more world experience you have, the more information you have to draw from to create. The more, I guess the analogy or the metaphor is a palette that you can paint with.
Right.
It's all of these life experiences that you, frankly, when you're 21, you think you know it all, but you don't. And so I think it's my only thing would be, it's not just an advertising thing. I think it's true of really any profession, unless you're one of the few people that, you have this calling. Like, my father always knew he wanted to be a surgeon. He knew he wanted to be a doctor. And so for him, it was a mission. There are people that have that thing that they want to be, and but a lot of us, frankly, we grow up and it's like, well, I knew I didn't want to. The only thing I knew was that I didn't want to be a doctor like my dad. So I was floating around trying to find, how am I going to make a living in this world? Hopefully someday find a wife, have kids, but you need to have a profession to.
The irony, I think, in our profession is that while it's advantageous to wait a bit, maybe it's a couple of years. I waited till I was 30, although it wasn't something that I waited for. I didn't find advertising until I was about 30. It wasn't an intention to say, I'm going to put this off. The irony is that when you hit 50 as a creative, you become a target for a lot of ad agencies because you become too expensive.
A target in a bad way, not a target in we want to hire that guy way.
Exactly.
Because you're making too much money.
Right. Unless you're a superstar. Unless you're a superstar. But if you are a really talented senior level person, you can put out the work in a fraction of the time of a junior, but the senior muckety mucks at your shop want to get rid of you.
Even if you're extremely talented. I know people who have won multiple Cannes Lions, who have worked on the biggest advertising brands, who have worked on multiple Super Bowl spots, and they reached a point in their career where they were just unhireable because the agencies look at the guy's resume and say, we can't afford that guy, without even talking to him.
Right.
Or they're like, well, we don't want this guy because he's probably set in his ways, and it's like, no, he's a guy who knows what he's doing. He's not, if you have a small agency, he's going to know what his role is going to be, but you're going to be better for having his expertise. But that's not the way they see it. The
Right.
bean counters are in charge of all of this
No,
stuff.
I agree with you as well, that we're talking about advertising, but this is relevant to any career. I think you need to get out there and kind of live your life and experience things that you can't learn from a book, that you can't learn from watching a documentary.
And I think that the corollary to that is, don't be afraid to make a switch midstream.
Absolutely.
Right?
I've changed careers. I'm on my third or fourth career. I did PR, then I went to graduate school, then I did 26 years in the ad business, then I taught college full time. Now I'm a corporate trainer and an author, and a podcaster, although we're not making any money doing this, we're having a lot of fun doing it. But these are different things that you could call professional pursuits.
Yeah. I mean, so start out in one direction, and I think being open to possibilities outside of your profession is another important piece of advice. We were talking before we started recording, the John Lennon lyric. It's a beautiful song called Beautiful Boy, and he says, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans.
Yep.
And that's true. So be attuned to, maybe you thought that you were going to do something and it ended up that that's not for you.
Yeah, kind of like this episode. We weren't planning on talking about this, but here we are. Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.